Democritus of Abdera, circa 460 to circa 370 BC. A work in the philosophy of nature, probably well around about 4th century BC, it was transcribed. The principal ideas of which are that since nothing can come from nothing and change really occurs and motion requires a void, reality must consist of atoms moving in a void. The only inherent properties of atoms are size, shape and solidity, colour, sweetness, bitterness. Other such qualities are attributes attributed to objects because of the sensations occurring within experiencing organisms, but such qualities have no existence in objects. The sensations that come from experiencing various kinds of atoms vary according to the shapes of the atoms. The best form of government is the democratic. The wise man is one who limits his ambition according to his ability. In all probability, credit for the fundamental ideas of the atomic theory, Greek speculation's greatest achievement, should go to Leucippus of Miletus rather than his pupil Democritus, but we know almost nothing of Leucippus. Rational speculation about the nature of the world began not earlier than the 6th century BC. 4 or 5 generations later it had progressed, in Democritus, to an essentially correct account of the nature of matter. This amazing fact has led to both exaggeration and underestimation of the Greek achievement. On the one hand, some people conclude that science stood still until the revival of the atomic theory in the 17th century. On the other, scientists especially are prone to point out that modern atomic physics rests on evidence derived from careful quantitative experimentation of which the Greeks knew nothing. Therefore, it is said, the ancient theory was merely a lucky guess, and the Greeks made all possible guesses. A brief review of the development of early Greek physics will show that while Democritus did not have Dalton's reasons for asserting that the world consists of atoms moving in the void, he nevertheless had some very good ones. Knowing these, we shall be able to compare ancient and modern atomism less superficially and misleadingly. The men of Miletus, especially Anaximander, who made the break with mythological world accounts in the early 6th century BC, took over from previous creation myths 2 important assumptions. First, these Milesians accepted the belief that there was a creation, or rather a development. The world was not always as it is now, but had in the beginning been something simple and homogeneous, like the chaos of the myths. Differentiation, complexity, organization have a history. Second, the Milesians accepted the theory that there exists an impersonal force making for order and justice in the universe at large. The Milesians were the first philosophers because they dispensed altogether with the will of the gods as an explanatory principle, because they assumed that the natural forces that made the universe what it is were of a kind still operative. The problem as they conceived it was to identify the original simple world stuff out of which all things had come, and to describe the process which had differentiated and organized it into the present world. Not divine inspiration, but ordinary human reason, they thought, was capable of solving the problem. And since conclusions based on reasons invite criticism and modification, unlike revelations which can be only accepted or rejected, the history of rational speculation was progressive. In addition to the ideas of ultimate oneness, development and justice inherited from religion, the earliest philosophers assumed with common sense that nothing can come out of nothing or be absolutely destroyed, and that our senses reveal to us directly the constituents of the world, at least as it is now. We feel heat and cold, we taste sweetness and bitterness, we see red and green. Heat, cold, sweetness, bitterness, red and green are therefore parts of the objective world. Together they make it up. We should say that these are qualities of matter, but early Greek thought does not make this distinction. The hot, the cold, the wet and dry and so on in various combinations are the stuff of things. One must simply find out the unity underlying this diversity. Thus, for example, Anaximenes, the third of the Milesian physicists, held that the fundamental stuff is mist. Everything is really mist. The things that do not appear to be mist are mist that has been thickened or thinned. Very thin mist is fire. Mist is somewhat thickened is water. Thickened still more, and then it is stone. There is an inconsistency here which Parmenides, in effect, pointed out. No doubt the theory of Anaximenes squares with observation, for fire, when cooled and thickened, becomes smoke, and smoke is easy to regard at this stage of thought as a kind of fog or mist. Condensed mist is water, and water thickened still more becomes ice, a solid, a kind of stone. But is the theory compatible with logic? Fire is identical with the hot and dry, water is identical with the cold and wet. How then can the one be transformed into the other without violating the fundamental principle that nothing can come from nothing? Where did the cold come from? Where has the hot gone? If cold and hot are thought of, so to speak, as substances, it seems there can be no satisfactory answer to this question. Something has come out of nothing. Something has disappeared into nothing. Worse still, as Parmenides saw, if there is ultimately just one stuff, that stuff must be just the kind of stuff it is, so that it cannot logically be both hot and cold, both wet and dry. Therefore change is impossible. If things seem to change, as they do, this must be mere illusion, for logic pronounces it contradictory. It is important to see that Parmenides was right given his assumptions of monism, nothing from nothing, and identity of things and qualities. Parmenides had another argument, a fallacious one, to show that the kind of change called motion cannot really occur. It is this: if a thing moves, there must be room for it to move into. That is, there must be empty space. But there cannot be an empty space, for empty space would be just nothing, that which is not, and the assertion that there is empty space amounts to saying that which is not is, a statement of contradiction. The philosophers Empedocles and Anaxagoras tried to develop systems which would meet the logical objections of Parmenides without flying in the face of common sense. They argued that motion could occur without empty space if the moving thing displaced what was in front of it, as a fish swims in water. For the rest, they all abandoned monism. Empedocles said that there are 6 basic stuffs, while Anaxagoras held that there are an infinity, as many stuffs as there are sensible discriminations, and all things are made by the mixture and separation of these stuffs. The philosophy of Anaxagoras successfully met Parmenides' criticism, but at too high a price. While it is hard to say precisely just what it is that we are asking for when we demand for an explanation of something, at any rate it is clear that an explanation is not satisfactory unless in some sense the ideas used in the explanation are simpler or more unified than the thing to be explained. But if one's explanatory principles are as diverse as the thing to be explained, the requirement cannot be met. Flour is a mixture in which flour stuff predominates. Water is a mixture in which water stuff predominates. The two make bread because when they are mixed and baked, the bread stuff in both of them comes to the fore. This may be true, but it is too easy and it does not explain anything. Leucippus and Democritus discovered a better way of answering Parmenides. As to motion, Leucippus flatly declared that nothing does exist, while Democritus more appropriately dismissed Parmenides' quibble with another. Well, there's a bit of a joke here, but probably doesn't translate very well. Anyway, here goes. Hing exists no more than not hing. The point of the joke being that if nothing does not exist, hold on, I'll just get this joke right. Hing exists no more than not hing. The point of the joke being that if nothing does not exist is a truth of logic, elimination of the double negative must also produce a logical truth. Hing does exist, but hing, so far from existing, is not even a word. Greek for nothing is meden, of which me means not, while den has no meaning in isolation. Well, jokes don't translate very well. There is then a void, especially after you've just told that joke. And things that move in it, these things are atoms, uncuttables. Each separate atom is like the reality of Parmenides, uncreated, indestructible, unchanging. The matter in an atom is homogeneous, and nothing can happen to one internally. That is, each atom is infinitely hard. Atoms differ from one another in size and shape. That is all. They do not differ in colour, for instance, but not because they are all the same colour. They do so because they have no colour at all, not even black or grey. Similarly, for heat, moisture, taste and odour, atoms have always been and always will be in motion like the motes in a sunbeam. They jostle one another, and in their jostling, two kinds of processes occur that result in the coming into being of the large-scale aggregates with which we are familiar. One is vortex motion, the effect of which is to separate random aggregates according to likenesses. The heavier, that is, the bigger atoms going to the centre, the lighter ones to the periphery. The other process is the hooking on to each other by atoms of like configurations. One atom can affect another only by colliding with it, and the outcome of a collision, hooking or change of direction or speed, is determined by the sizes, shapes and velocities of the atoms involved in the collision. But the sizes and shapes are eternal, and the velocities in their turn are outcomes of previous collisions. Therefore there is no such thing as chance in nature. Nothing happens at random. Leucippus pronounced in the one sentence of his that he has survived, and I quote, "But everything from a rationale and by necessity." Ideally, explanation should consist in finding out the laws of motion and impact and using these to show how one atomic configuration came about from a previous one. Such a complex act is of course impossible. However, Democritus sought to apply the fundamental idea of mechanical causation to observable phenomena. There is an ancient story that illustrates his method and points up its difference from traditional concepts. Considerable interest has been aroused by the extraordinary death of a prominent man. When he was strolling along a beach, an eagle had dropped a turtle on his head. Why? It was recalled that an oracle had said that he would die of a bolt from Zeus. This had been thought to be a prediction of death by a stroke of lightning, but someone pointed out that the eagle was sacred to Zeus, thus the oracle was fulfilled. This satisfied most Greeks, but not Democritus. He went to the beach and observed the habits of eagles. He found that they were fond of turtle meat. In order to get at it, the eagle would seize a turtle in his talons, fly into the air with it, and drop it on a rock to crack the shell. This observation, together with the fact that the deceased had been bald, provided an explanation that satisfied Democritus. The curious event was shown to be one item in a natural regularity or pattern. It was unnecessary to postulate the purposes of unseen beings to account for the fact. Aristotle complained, quite unjustifiably, that Democritus reduced the explanation of nature to the statement that it happened formerly also. The fact is that Democritus understood the character of scientific explanation better than Aristotle. In sum, Democritus' reason for asserting that reality consists of atoms moving in the void is that this statement can be deduced from the premises. First, nothing comes from nothing. Second, change really occurs. And third, motion requires a void. That explanation must be mechanistic, also follows from these assumptions. It is further allowed that all interaction is impact. Democritus' mechanism was also the culmination of the rejection of animistic and supernatural will forces by all his philosophical predecessors. Democritus' atomism, and still more his mechanism, agree in principle with the fundamental tenets of modern physical science. By in principle, it is meant to rule out an inessential, though important, such differences as that particles of the present-day physicists or wave packets or whatever, and fuzzy and hookless. What is essential is the concept of matter as somehow granular, and that physical processes are analysable into redistributions of energy among these grains. What modern physicists have that Democritus lacked is a conception of controlled quantitative experimentation together with the technique of mathematical manipulation of the data. For this reason, Democritus, though he declared that he would rather discover one causal explanation than gain the kingdom of the Persians, failed utterly to add to detailed knowledge of nature. In fact, he was much behind his own times, still believing, for instance, that the earth is a flat disk, though the Pythagoreans had long understood its sphericity. In detailed explanations, Democritus could do no better than this. Thunder is produced by an unstable mixture forcing the cloud and closing it to move downward. Lightning is a clashing together of clouds by which the fire-producing atoms, rubbing against each other, are assembled through the porous mass into one place and pass out. And the thunderbolt occurs when the motion is forced by the very pure, very fine, uniform, and closely packed fire-producing atoms, as he himself called them. The foregoing is an ancient paraphrase, not a quotation from Democritus. It must be admitted that this account is no worse than any other prior to Franklin, and a considerable improvement over Zeus's angry. By convention, colour, by convention sweet, by convention bitter, but in reality atoms and void. Thus Democritus states his theory: the atoms alone are real and their only inherent qualities. We can use this word now, for Democritus distinguished for the first time clearly between thing and quality, are size, shape, solidity. Then what about colour, sweet, bitter, and the rest? They are by convention. What does this mean? Democritus held that a man's soul consists of particularly fine and spherical, hence mobile, atoms. When certain images from the external world, the images being, of course, themselves assemblages of atoms, impinge on the soul atoms, a sensation is produced. The sensation occurs only within the ensouled body, hence is not out there because the external world is colourless and odourless. This is part of the meaning of by convention, a phrase that might be rendered as subjective. The sensations are also subjective in the sense that they lead us to suppose, falsely, that the world is coloured and odourless. There are two forms of knowledge, one genuine, one obscure. Of the obscure sort are all these: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch. The genuine is distinguished from this whenever the obscure cannot sense any farther into the minute by seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting or touching, but it is necessary to pursue the investigation more finely, then the genuine, which has a fine organ of knowledge, comes up. Who would mind my organ coming up now and again? Anyway, the organ of genuine knowledge would seem to be the pure reason that led Democritus to introduce the atomic nature of matter. But Democritus was worried, as well he might have been, about the obscure. He portrayed the senses speaking thus to the mind: "Wretched mind, getting from us your confidences, you cast us down. That is your own downfall. For the information on which even the atomic theory is based is, after all, derived ultimately from observation through the senses. If reality consists of matter with only its primary qualities, what kind of reality do their sensation and thought and consciousness in general have? This problem besets all forms of materialism and is often alleged wrongly to be fatal to it as a worldview. Democritus spent much effort in trying to account for sensations on atomic principles. Thus he claimed that sour fluids consist of angular and twisted atoms, honey is made of rounded, rather large ones. This was, of course, inconsistent with his claim that tastes are subjective efforts. He could have patched up the account to some extent by considering not only the atomic constitution of the food, but also that of the tongue which interacts with it. But there is no evidence that he did so. Perhaps it was despair at this problem that led him to claim, "In reality we know nothing, for truth is in a depth." Materialists should say that sensations are not things at all, but Democritus held that they are illusory things. This, at any rate, is the impression we get from ancient discussions of his theory of knowledge. It may be mistaken, for the accounts all come from hostile critics who may well have misunderstood or misrepresented the great Abderite. Unlike most Greek philosophers, Democritus was a partisan of democracy. He said poverty in a democracy is as much preferable to so-called prosperity in an autocracy of freedom, as freedom is to slavery. By democracy he meant constitutional government, directed by public-spirited, intelligent men in the interest of all citizens. Democritus was one of the most prolific authors of antiquity, having written, we are told, more than 60 works. All have perished. The fragments that remain fill about 10 pages of ordinary print, of which 8 are concerned with ethics, politics, education, and child rearing. Democritus thought it a risky and thankless business to have children. Many of the ethical reflections are unbearably platitudinous. For instance, in good fortune it is easy to find a friend, in misfortune hardest of all. Others are shrewd and worldly wise. If you cannot understand the compliments, conclude that you are being flattered. The general tenor of the maxims is advocacy of cheerfulness, that is, of prudence, contentment with what one has, not worrying too much. He who would be cheerful must not busy himself with many things, either by himself or in company, and whatever he busies himself with, He should not choose what is beyond his own power and nature, but he should be so on his guard that when a stroke of fortune tempts him to excess, he puts it aside and does not grasp at what is beyond his powers, for being well filled is better than being stuffed. There are some fragments, however, that rise quite above this pedestrian level, embodying in fact teachings often credited to others and used unfairly to belabor crude materialism. Refrain from wrongdoing, not from fear, but from duty. The doer of injustice is unhappier than the sufferer. Goodness is not merely in refraining from being unjust, but in not even wishing to be. The cause of error is ignorance of the better.